Anyone who knows anything about steam locomotives knows about the Union Pacific Big Boys. Not only are they some of the biggest locomotives in the world, but possess incredible speed and pulling power for their size. Despite being the most famous example, they weren't the first engines in the world to be known as Big Boys, as like a lot of things in the US, this name has its roots in Europe. By 1910, Hungarian State Railways, or MÁV, was in need of some more powerful locomotives to handle ever-increasing workloads. This demand was partially met in 1909 with the 651 series of articulated 0660 engines, and while they were capable of pulling heavy trains along steep and winding routes, they still struggled on some of the tougher grades of the network, especially around the karst landscapes in the west of Austria-Hungary close to the coast. The smaller 401 series built a few years prior were also proving to be insufficient, and so something even bigger was needed to do the job. Since the routes that needed servicing were steep and winding, the locomotives needed to be just as flexible as they were powerful, and as the previous Mallet designs proved to be capable of satisfying both of those needs, the railway decided another, bigger Mallet was what was needed. Hungarian Royal State Iron, Steel and Machine Factories set about designing this machine with the 651s as a basis. The end result was a 2660 engine with 1,440mm driving wheels, a Broten boiler which featured a water tube firebox, superheater, Walschaerts valve gear, an American-style spark arrestor, 4 cylinders, 2 sets of Westinghouse air brakes, feed water purifiers, and measured in at over 22.5 meters long and weighed just over 100 tons, with an adhesive weight of 97 tons. The wheels were driven by 2 pairs of cylinders, one 520 by 660mm high-pressure set mounted on the rear set of driving wheels, and an 800 by 660mm low-pressure pair powering the front bogie. Steam would be taken from the boiler and first go into the rear high-pressure cylinders before being exhausted and reused by the low-pressure ones. The boiler and rear set of driving wheels were fixed together, while the front set were connected via a ball joint which allowed it to articulate. Because of how sharp some of the bends on the line were, some adjustments were made to the wheels to allow for some lateral movement. The flanges of the rear driving wheels on the front bogie were thinner than the rest, and the first set of driving wheels on the rear bogie had 12mm of lateral play. Not only did each set of bogies have their own Westinghouse air brakes, but the engines were also fitted with direct-acting regulating brakes, essentially automatic brakes that would help control their speed when going downhill, as well as steam counter brakes which essentially reversed the direction the cylinders were working to help bring the engines to a stop. Sanding gear was also fitted to help provide traction, with a dome mounted on top of the boiler near the front to supply the front wheels, and an additional sandbox mounted near the cab to supply the rear wheels. These engines were intended to not only be strong, but fast as well, as they were not only to pull heavy freight trains through the mountains, but also passenger and express services too. The first 2 engines were completed in 1904, classified as the 601 series, and during testing were found to have a top speed of 60 km an hour and could produce a maximum of 2,950 horsepower. Pleased with the results, MÁV ordered 18 more to be built, followed by an order of another 40. By 1918, 60 locomotives had been built, with 3 of them being for use in Turkey, while the remaining 57 worked in Austria-Hungary. By this point, they had proven themselves as strong and reliable machines, capable of handling heavy loads, steep grades, and tight bends with relative ease. Not only that, but they were the largest locomotives working in Europe at the time, garnering them a significant amount of interest from railway enthusiasts, their size earning the class the nickname of the Giant, or in some places, Big Boy. Unfortunately, they didn't get much publicity outside of Austria-Hungary on account of the First World War raging on, and once the war concluded in 1918, they ended up scattered among several different countries, mostly on account of the fact that Austria-Hungary didn't exist anymore. With the empire broken up, much of their railway rolling stock was split between the newly formed countries, and out of the 57 601s that belonged to Austria-Hungary, 15 went to Romania, 6 to Czechoslovakia, and the remaining 36 went to the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats and Slovenes, aka Yugoslavia, primarily working in the north of what is now Croatia on the line they were initially built for. As an order for 60 locomotives was put in, however, not including the 3 Turkish engines, another 3 were built in 1921 for work in Hungary. Since Hungary no longer owned the railway the 601s were designed to run on, they were instead put to work pulling coal trains from the Fehérségala coal basin. What duties they performed in Romania and Czechoslovakia aren't widely known, as records of their performance are hard to come by, but with little to no negative reports on them in service, it's safe to say that they remained strong and reliable no matter where they worked. The only real issue that's reported are the ones that worked in Hungary had to be modified to help reduce the buildup of scale in their boilers. All 6 Czech locomotives and 1 from Romania were given back to Hungary as part of the Vienna Awards in 1938, with 2 going back to Romania after the Second World War, leaving Hungary with 8. All 63 locomotives kept working well until the 1940s, but as the 50s came, so too did better and more up-to-date engines. The coal lines in Hungary were electrified, putting the 601s out of work. They were kept to one side as reserve units and used for boiler heating duties, but these were jobs they were wasted doing. It's likely that despite their power, their age and complex nature made them too expensive to keep running, especially on railways that preferred standardized designs or were switching to diesel and electric traction. Withdrawals began by the end of the 1940s, with the last of the Hungarian engines being cut up in 1958, with the Romanian engines vanishing not long after in 1960. When the other engines were withdrawn and scrapped isn't specified, but none remained by the end of the 1960s. None were preserved. It's a shame that none of these giant engines were saved. While not the most powerful engines to ever run in Europe, their size and seeming reliability did make them quite the spectacle. Maybe not quite as big and brutish as their American cousins, but certainly just as striking. Subscribe for more.